The laughter echoed through the combat training hall like broken glass scraping against metal. Marcus Chen stood in the center of the circular arena, his human frame looking impossibly small next to the towering alien cadets that surrounded him. The Galactic Combat Academy had been humanity's first step into the greater universe, and right now, Marcus felt like he was about to become their biggest embarrassment. "Look at the little pink creature," hissed Zarathek, a 7-foot-tall reptilian warrior from the Saurian Empire. Her scales shimmered with a metallic blue-green hue, and her forearms flexed with muscles that could crush steel. "Does it even have bones, or is it made of that soft human flesh we keep hearing about?" The other cadets joined in the mockery. There was Gorvash, a crystalline being whose body could deflect plasma bolts, his form crackling with internal energy. Beside him stood Krindar, an insectoid warrior whose chitinous exoskeleton had been forged in the volcanic forges of his homeworld. Even the smaller aliens looked down on Marcus with barely concealed contempt. Instructor Veltar, a massive centauroid with the upper body of a warrior and the lower body of an armored war beast, stomped into the center of the arena. His 6 eyes focused on Marcus with what might have been pity or annoyance. "Cadet Chen," his voice boomed through the translation device embedded in every student's collar. "You have been assigned to Combat Class Advanced Level 7. This appears to be an error in our systems." Marcus straightened his shoulders, though the gesture seemed pathetic compared to the natural battle stances of his classmates. "No error, sir. I requested this level." The laughter grew louder. Zarathek's forked tongue flicked out in amusement. "Requested? The soft skin thinks it can fight with real warriors?" Instructor Veltar's tail lashed behind him, a sign of growing irritation. The Galactic Combat Academy had trained warriors from 300 different species over the past millennium. Humans had only joined the galactic community 5 years ago, and their reputation was less than impressive. They were known for their technology, their adaptability, their strange emotional bonds, but certainly not for their combat prowess. "Very well," Veltar rumbled. "Since you insist on wasting everyone's time, we will begin with basic assessment. You will face Novice Krindar in a standard combat evaluation. Non-lethal engagement, full contact allowed. Combat continues until submission, unconsciousness, or instructor intervention." Krindar clicked his mandibles in what Marcus had learned was equivalent to cruel laughter. The insectoid's forearms ended in razor-sharp claws, and his exoskeleton bore the scars of countless battles. "I will try not to break you too quickly, little mammal. The medical bay charges extra for putting soft creatures back together." Marcus walked to his starting position, ignoring the continued jeers from the gallery of alien cadets. He had known this moment would come from the day he'd arrived at the academy. Earth's government had sent him here as part of the cultural exchange program, supposedly to learn alien combat techniques and bring that knowledge back to humanity's growing military forces. What they didn't know was why Marcus had really volunteered for this assignment. The combat arena was a perfect circle, 50 meters in diameter, with a surface that could shift from sand to metal to crystalline formation depending on the training requirements. Today it remained as polished metal, reflecting the overhead lights and the eager faces of the spectators. Around the arena's edge, holographic displays showed real-time biometric data from both fighters. Instructor Veltar raised one massive arm. "Combatants, prepare for engagement. Standard Academy rules apply. Begin when the tone sounds." Marcus closed his eyes for just a moment, feeling the familiar calm wash over him. His classmates saw a small, weak human with pale skin and soft features. They saw someone who had never evolved natural weapons, never developed armor-like skin or enhanced reflexes. They saw prey. They had never seen a human who had spent 12 years studying every martial art Earth had to offer. The tone sounded, a deep harmonic note that vibrated through the arena floor. Krindar immediately launched himself forward, his forearms spread wide to prevent Marcus from dodging to either side. His claws gleamed under the arena lights, and his powerful legs propelled him across the distance between them in less than 2 seconds. It was a perfect hunting strike, the kind that had made his species apex predators on their homeworld. Marcus didn't try to dodge. Instead, he stepped forward into the attack, his movement so fluid it seemed like he was dancing. His left hand swept up in a perfect arc, deflecting Krindar's primary striking arm while his right hand drove forward with surgical precision. The strike landed at the exact junction where Krindar's carapace segments met, a point so small that most beings would need a targeting computer to find it. The impact sent a shockwave through Krindar's entire nervous system. The insectoid's eyes went wide, his other 3 arms spasming as his primary motor control shut down. Before gravity could even begin to pull him toward the ground, Marcus had already moved again. His legs swept in a perfect circle, hooking behind Krindar's knees while his hands guided the already falling warrior into a controlled descent. In one fluid motion, Marcus had gone from being a target to having his opponent helpless on the ground, with a submission hold that threatened to crush Krindar's primary breathing apparatus. The entire sequence had taken exactly 13 seconds. The arena fell completely silent. Even the ever-present hum of the Academy's life support systems seemed to have stopped in shock. Marcus held his position, applying just enough pressure to keep Krindar immobilized without causing permanent damage. Submission, Krindar wheezed through his translator, his voice barely a whisper. Marcus released the hold immediately and stood, offering his hand to help his opponent up. Krindar stared at the offered hand for a long moment before accepting it, his mandibles clicking in what Marcus now recognized as confusion rather than hostility. Instructor Veltar's 6 eyes were all focused on Marcus now, studying him with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. The other cadets had stopped laughing entirely, their various forms of alien expressions all showing the same emotion: shock. "Interesting," Veltar said finally, his voice carrying a note that Marcus had never heard before. "Perhaps there has been no error after all." The Academy's central cafeteria buzzed with nervous energy as news of Marcus's victory spread through the student body like wildfire. Beings from dozens of species huddled in their respective groups, their conversations creating a symphony of alien languages that the universal translators struggled to keep up with. Marcus sat alone at a corner table, methodically eating what the food dispensers had identified as Human Nutritional Requirement Meal 7. It tasted like cardboard mixed with artificial vitamins, but he had learned not to complain. The Academy's food synthesizers did their best to accommodate the dietary needs of hundreds of different species, though the results were rarely appetizing for anyone. "Mind if we join you?" Marcus looked up to see Krindar approaching, followed by 2 other aliens he recognized from the combat class. The insectoid's movements were still slightly stiff from their earlier encounter, but his mandibles were clicking in what Marcus had learned was a sign of curiosity rather than aggression. "Please," Marcus gestured to the empty chairs around his table. "I hope you're feeling all right." Krindar settled into a chair designed for his species' anatomy, his 4 arms folding neatly in front of him. "My pride hurts more than my body. That strike you used, I have never encountered anything like it. Our combat instructors teach us to target weak points, but they are usually much larger areas." The second alien, a floating gaseous being called Whisper, whose consciousness resided in a containment suit, drifted closer. The precision was remarkable. "Our analysis shows you struck a nerve cluster only 3 millimeters wide. The probability of such accuracy by chance is statistically impossible." The third member of their group was Nyx, a humanoid alien with silver skin and elongated limbs. Her species, the Etherians, were known for their telepathic abilities, though Academy rules strictly forbade mental intrusion without consent. "I felt your mental state during the fight," she said quietly. "You were completely calm. Most beings experience fear, rage, or excitement during combat. You felt peaceful." Marcus paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. He had expected many reactions to his performance, but genuine curiosity hadn't been one of them. Most species in the galaxy saw combat as either a necessary evil or a test of physical superiority. The idea that fighting could be an art form seemed foreign to them. "On Earth we call it martial arts," he said finally. "The word martial means relating to war, but art means something beautiful, something that requires skill and practice to master. We believe that fighting can be both deadly and graceful at the same time." Whisper's containment suit flickered with interest. "This is a contradiction. Combat is about inflicting damage efficiently. Beauty is irrelevant, is it?" Marcus set down his fork and leaned forward. "Krindar, when you hunt on your homeworld, do you simply charge at your prey and hope for the best?" The insectoid's antennae twitched. "Of course not. Hunting requires patience, timing, understanding of the prey's behavior patterns. And when you strike, do you use all your strength at once, or do you apply exactly the right amount of force at exactly the right moment?" "The right amount, naturally. Excess force wastes energy and can damage valuable parts of the prey. Marcus smiled. Then you already understand the principle. Martial arts simply takes that concept and refines it until every movement has purpose. Every technique serves multiple functions, and no energy is wasted. Nix leaned back in her chair, her large silver eyes reflecting the cafeteria's lights. You speak of combat as if it were music or painting. Why shouldn't it be? Marcus asked. Humans have been fighting for survival since we first evolved. But we discovered that the beings who survived longest weren't always the strongest or the fastest. They were the ones who could adapt, who could think during combat, who could turn an opponent's strength against them. Krindar clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. This explains your technique against me. You did not try to match my physical power. Instead, you redirected it, exactly. In human martial arts, we have a saying, be like water. Water doesn't fight against obstacles, it flows around them. But given time and patience, water can carve through solid rock. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion from across the cafeteria. Zarathek, the large reptilian who had mocked Marcus earlier, was approaching their table with several of her companions. Her scales had shifted to a darker color, which Marcus recognized as a sign of aggression in her species. So the little human has found some friends, she hissed. Her four arms crossed in a display of dominance. I suppose they are impressed by your lucky victory against the bug. Krindar's carapace darkened, but Marcus placed a calming hand on his arm. Hello, Zarathek. Would you like to join us? We were discussing different approaches to combat. The reptilian's eyes narrowed. I know all I need to know about combat, Pinkskin. My people have conquered 17 star systems through superior warrior strength. We do not need to rely on tricks and deception like weaker species. Strength is certainly important, Marcus agreed. Your people's military victories speak for themselves. But I'm curious in all those conquests. Did you ever face an opponent who refused to fight the way you expected them to? Zarathek's companions, a mix of various warrior species, shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a rocky humanoid from the mineral-rich Gravitic Confederation, spoke up. The Helios Federation tried unconventional tactics against us. Guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run attacks. They thought they could avoid direct confrontation. And, Marcus prompted, we adapted our strategies and crushed them anyway, Zarathek said with satisfaction. Superior firepower always wins in the end, Marcus nodded slowly. But you had to adapt. You couldn't simply rely on your original approach. That adaptation, that ability to change tactics based on your opponent, that's exactly what martial arts teaches. Whisper's containment suit glowed brighter. An interesting perspective. Combat as problem-solving rather than mere violence. Every fight is a conversation, Marcus explained. Your opponent asks you a question with their attack, and you answer with your defense or counterattack. The winner is usually the one who can ask better questions and give better answers. Zarathek's scales shifted to an even darker color. Pretty words, human. But when we face each other in the arena, your philosophy will not save you from my claws. Perhaps not, Marcus said calmly. But then again, Krindar probably thought his claws would be enough too. The tension around the table thickened like soup. Several other students had stopped their own conversations to watch the exchange. Marcus could feel the weight of their attention. The expectation of either submission or escalation. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He laughed, not mockingly or aggressively, but with genuine amusement. You know what's funny? I came here expecting to be the weakest student in the academy. I thought I'd spend most of my time getting beaten up and trying to learn from species that evolved specifically for combat. He stood up from his chair, his movement fluid and relaxed. But maybe that's exactly what I needed. On Earth, I was considered exceptionally skilled. Here, I'm just another student trying to improve. I think I'm going to learn more in the next few months than I have in years. Zarathek stared at him as if he had grown a second head. The concept of deliberately seeking out stronger opponents seemed to confuse her more than Marcus's combat techniques had. You are strange. Even for a human, she said finally. Thank you, Marcus replied. I'll take that as a compliment. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus's first combat demonstration, and the Academy's atmosphere had shifted in subtle but noticeable ways. The human was no longer the subject of open mockery, though he still drew curious stares wherever he went. More importantly, other students had begun approaching him with questions about his fighting techniques. Today's advanced combat class was different from the usual format. Instead of individual matches, Instructor Veltar had announced a group exercise designed to simulate real battlefield conditions. The students would be divided into 2 teams and compete in a capture-the-flag scenario through the Academy's holographic training maze. Team assignments are based on compatibility and strategic balance, Veltar announced, his massive form casting shadows across the assembled students. Team Alpha will be led by Cadet Zarthak. Team Beta will be led by Cadet Chen. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear the ventilation system cycling air through the training facility. Every pair of eyes, compound eye, optical sensor, and electromagnetic detector turned toward him. Leading a team meant that the Academy's instructors considered him capable of tactical command, not just individual combat. Zarathek's scales rippled through several color changes before settling on a mottled pattern that Marcus had learned indicated confusion mixed with anger. Instructor, surely this is another system error. The human has been here less than a month. Cadet Zarathek. Veltar's voice carried a warning tone that made several students step backward. Are you questioning the Academy's assessment protocols? The reptilian's forearms flexed, but she remained silent. Challenging an instructor's decision was grounds for immediate disciplinary action. Veltar's 6 eyes scanned the assembled students. Team Alpha, Zarathek, Gorvash, Torgon, Brixtel, and Vexmari. Team Beta, Chen, Krindar, Whisper, Nyx, and Zephyr. Marcus studied his assigned teammates with mixed feelings. Krindar, Whisper, and Nyx had become something approaching friends over the past few weeks, but Zephyr was an unknown quantity. The avian warrior stood nearly 8 feet tall, with metallic feathers that could deflect energy weapons and talons sharp enough to cut through starship hull plating. His species valued honor above all else, and he had maintained a stoic silence toward Marcus since the insectoid fight. Teams will have 30 minutes to plan strategy before the exercise begins, Veltar continued. The maze configuration is Fortress Assault Level 7. Capture your opponent's flag and return it to your base while defending your own flag. Standard non-lethal weapons are authorized. Medical teams are standing by. As the instructor dismissed them to their planning areas, Marcus gathered his team in a small conference room adjacent to the training facility. The room's adaptive furniture quickly reconfigured itself to accommodate the different species' physical requirements. Well, Whisper said, his gaseous form swirling within his containment suit. This should be educational. I calculate our probability of victory at approximately 37%. Zephyr's metallic feathers rustled, creating a sound like wind chimes in a storm. Statistical analysis is for machines. Victory comes from courage and honor in battle. Both perspectives have merit, Marcus said diplomatically. But before we worry about winning or losing, let's understand what we're dealing with. What do you know about fortress assault scenarios? Krindar's mandibles clicked as he accessed his memory files. Standard configuration includes multiple approach routes, defensive choke points, and environmental hazards. The defending team typically has an advantage due to prepared positions. Nyx closed her silver eyes, her telepathic abilities allowing her to access the Academy's public tactical databases. Previous exercises show that most teams attempt direct assault on the enemy flag. Success rate is low due to concentrated defensive fire. What about indirect approaches? Marcus asked, such as. Zephyr's tone suggested skepticism. Marcus activated the room's holographic display, which showed a 3-dimensional map of the training maze. The fortress structure was imposing, with high walls, narrow entry points, and multiple levels that provided excellent defensive positions. Most tactical minds would focus on finding the best way to breach those defenses. What if we don't try to breach them at all? Marcus suggested. Whisper's containment suit flickered with interest. Elaborate. Look at the mission parameters again. We need to capture their flag and return it to our base. There's no requirement that we destroy their defenses or defeat their entire team. What if we focused on misdirection instead of direct confrontation? Krindar leaned forward, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic display. You propose a feint? More than that. I propose we give them exactly what they expect to see, while accomplishing our actual objective through methods they won't anticipate. Marcus manipulated the hologram, highlighting different sections of the maze. Zarathek is a natural leader, but she thinks in terms of overwhelming force. She'll position her strongest fighters at the main defensive points and prepare for a frontal assault. Which we will not provide, Nyx said, understanding beginning to dawn in her telepathic emanations. Exactly. Whisper. Your gaseous form can move through spaces that would stop the rest of us. Nyx, your telepathic abilities allow for silent coordination. Krindar, your species evolved for stealth hunting. And Zephyr. Marcus paused, studying the avian warrior carefully. Your people value honor, but they also value tactical brilliance, don't they? Zephyr's feathers shifted to a brighter metallic sheen. Honor without wisdom is mere stupidity. Continue. Marcus outlined his plan, and with each detail, his teammates' expressions shifted from skepticism to intrigue to something approaching excitement. Even Zephyr began contributing suggestions, his tactical knowledge proving invaluable for refining the strategy. When the 30-minute planning period ended, both teams assembled at their respective starting positions. The training maze materialized around them, its holographic walls becoming solid enough to stop energy blasts and physical impacts. The fortress structure rose from the center of the maze like an ancient castle, its multiple levels glowing with defensive weapon emplacements. Instructor Veltar's voice echoed through the maze's communication system. Exercise begins in 60 seconds. Teams, prepare for combat. Marcus looked at his teammates, each of them now focused and ready. Krindar's carapace had darkened to near invisibility. Whisper's containment suit was operating in stealth mode, making him nearly transparent. Nyx had established telepathic links with everyone except Marcus, whose human brain was incompatible with her species' mental frequencies. Zephyr stood like a statue, his metallic feathers providing natural camouflage against the maze's metallic walls. Remember, Marcus said quietly, they're expecting a fight. Let's give them a dance instead. The exercise began with a thunderous roar as Zarathek's team immediately opened fire from their defensive positions. Energy bolts and projectile weapons filled the air with deadly light, creating a spectacular display of firepower that would have shredded any conventional assault force, but Marcus's team wasn't there to receive it while the enemy poured devastating fire into empty corridors and abandoned positions. Team Beta was already moving through sections of the maze that most tactical manuals would classify as impassable. Whisper flowed through ventilation shafts like smoke. Krindar scuttled along walls and ceilings with inhuman grace, and Zephyr used his powerful wings to reach positions that ground-bound species couldn't access. Nyx remained with Marcus, her telepathic abilities coordinating their movements while he provided tactical guidance and served as a mobile command center. They moved through the maze like water flowing around obstacles, never directly confronting the enemy's strength but always probing for weaknesses. Within 15 minutes, Whisper had reached the enemy flag chamber undetected. Within 20 minutes, the flag was in Team Beta's possession. Within 25 minutes, they had returned to their base while Zarathek's team was still firing at shadows and empty corridors. The exercise ended with Instructor Veltar's voice announcing Team Beta's victory, followed by the longest silence in Academy training history. When the maze dissolved and both teams found themselves standing in the training facility, Zarathek stared at Marcus with an expression that had moved far beyond anger into something approaching respect. "How?" was all she said. Marcus smiled. "You fought the battle you expected. We fought the battle that actually existed." Instructor Veltar approached, his 6 eyes studying Marcus with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. "Cadet Chen, report to my office after evening meal. We have much to discuss." Instructor Veltar's office was unlike any space Marcus had seen in the Academy. Where most areas were sterile and functional, designed to accommodate hundreds of different species, this room felt personal. Trophies from a dozen worlds lined the walls, weapons from civilizations that had risen and fallen before humanity had discovered fire, and holographic displays showing star maps of conflicts that had shaped galactic history. "Sit," Veltar rumbled, gesturing toward a chair that adjusted itself to Marcus's human proportions. The massive centauroid settled behind his desk, which looked more like a command center than office furniture. His 6 eyes studied Marcus with an intensity that made the young human feel like a specimen under a microscope. "You have been at this academy for 1 month, Veltar began, his voice carrying undertones that the translation system couldn't quite capture. "In that time, you have defeated a veteran cadet in single combat, demonstrated tactical innovation that impressed the instructional staff, and earned the respect of beings who have been training since before your species discovered spaceflight." Marcus remained silent, sensing that this was not the time for casual conversation. What puzzles me, Veltar continued, is that your species file indicates no significant military tradition. Humans are described as diplomatic, technological, adaptable, but not as warriors. Yet you demonstrate combat skills that rival species that evolved specifically for warfare. The instructor leaned forward, his alien features unreadable. So I must ask, who exactly are you, Marcus Chen? Marcus had known this conversation would come eventually. The Academy's instructors were too experienced to miss the discrepancies between humanity's general reputation and his specific abilities. The truth was going to come out, and Marcus had already decided it was better to control that revelation than let others discover it. Earth isn't as peaceful as our diplomatic corps likes people to believe, he said finally. We've had periods of peace, yes, but we've also had thousands of years of almost constant warfare. We've fought with sticks and stones, with swords and spears, with chemical explosives and nuclear weapons. We've fought for resources, for territory, for ideologies, for survival. Veltar's tail lashed behind him, a sign of growing interest. Continue. Most species in the galaxy seem to have developed warfare as an extension of their hunting instincts or territorial behaviors. For humans, fighting became something more complex. We developed warrior cultures that treated combat as art, philosophy, science, and religion all combined into one discipline. Marcus stood and moved to one of the trophy displays, studying an elegant curved blade that seemed to bend light around its edge. We had cultures that spent centuries perfecting sword-fighting techniques, monks who developed martial arts as paths to spiritual enlightenment, soldiers who studied the psychology of combat as deeply as its physical applications. And you are a product of these traditions, in a way. Marcus turned back to face the instructor. I started learning martial arts when I was 6 years old, not because I wanted to fight, but because my parents thought it would teach me discipline and confidence. I discovered I had a natural talent for it. The memories came flooding back as Marcus spoke. Hours spent in dojos and training halls, learning from masters who had devoted their entire lives to perfecting techniques passed down through generations. The frustration of hitting plateaus, the joy of breakthrough moments, the gradual understanding that physical technique was only the beginning of true martial mastery. By the time I was 18, I had black belts in 7 different martial arts systems: karate, judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, fencing, and Krav Maga. Each one taught me something different about the nature of combat. Veltar's 6 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of surprise. 7 distinct fighting systems? How is such breadth possible? Human martial arts aren't just about fighting, Marcus explained. They're about understanding your own body, your opponent's psychology, the environment around you, and the flow of energy and momentum in any given situation. Each system approaches these concepts from a different angle. Marcus moved to the center of the room and began demonstrating as he spoke, his movements flowing like water. Karate teaches linear power and precise striking. Judo focuses on using an opponent's momentum against them. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specializes in ground fighting and submission techniques. Muay Thai incorporates knees, elbows, and clinch work. Boxing perfects hand techniques and footwork. Fencing develops timing and distance management. Krav Maga synthesizes everything into practical self-defense. He completed a complex sequence that incorporated elements from all 7 arts, ending in a perfect balance stance. But the real lesson isn't in any individual technique. It's in learning to adapt, to flow between different approaches depending on what the situation requires. Veltar was silent for a long moment, his massive frame motionless except for the gentle sway of his tail. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of something that might have been awe. You study war as we study music. In many ways, yes. There's rhythm, timing, harmony, and improvisation. There's technical skill and artistic expression. There's individual performance and group coordination. Marcus returned to his chair. But there's also something more. Human martial arts teach us that the strongest warrior isn't necessarily the one who wins fights. It's the one who doesn't need to fight at all. Explain. Marcus thought carefully about how to phrase his next words. The highest level of martial arts mastery is when your presence alone discourages conflict. When opponents look at you and decide they'd rather find another solution. When you can end a fight without throwing a single strike. Yet you demonstrated considerable striking ability against Cadet Krindar. Because sometimes a quick, Decisive action prevents a longer, more destructive conflict. If I had tried to avoid that fight, it would have only encouraged more challenges. By ending it quickly and without causing serious harm, I established that I wasn't an easy target while also showing respect for my opponent. Veltar leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his massive weight. The Academy has files on thousands of combat systems from across the galaxy. Most focus on maximizing damage or exploiting specific biological advantages. Very few consider the philosophical implications of violence. That might be humanity's contribution to galactic civilization, Marcus suggested. We've had to learn to fight without losing our souls in the process. When you're as physically fragile as humans are, you can't rely on brute strength or natural weapons. You have to be smarter, more adaptable, more creative. The instructor activated a holographic display that showed combat statistics from the Academy's database. Your performance metrics are unusual. Your reaction time is slower than most warrior species. Your strength is below average. Your natural armor is non-existent. Yet your combat effectiveness rating is in the 95th percentile. Because I'm not trying to be faster or stronger than my opponents, Marcus explained. I'm trying to be more efficient, more precise, more strategic. Veltar manipulated the display, showing footage from Marcus's various training sessions. You have never used maximum force in any engagement. Even when facing opponents significantly larger than yourself, you employ only the minimum energy required to achieve your objective. Excessive force creates unnecessary problems. If you hurt someone more than required, you make enemies. If you use more energy than needed, you tire yourself out for future challenges. If you rely on overwhelming power, you never develop finesse. The massive alien studied the data for several more minutes, his 6 eyes processing information at speeds that would make a computer jealous. Finally, he looked up at Marcus with what the human had learned to recognize as respect. The Academy's mission is to train the galaxy's finest warriors, Veltar said slowly. We have always interpreted this to mean teaching students to win battles. Perhaps we have been thinking too narrowly. Marcus remained silent, sensing that the instructor was working through implications that went far beyond one human's martial arts background. How would you feel about teaching some of these concepts to other students? Veltar asked finally. I'm honored by the suggestion, but I'm not sure they'd be receptive. Most of the students here come from cultures where strength and aggression are valued above subtlety. Veltar's expression might have been a smile, though it was hard to tell with his alien features. Cadet Chen, after your performance in today's exercise, I believe you'll find that many students are quite interested in learning new approaches to combat. Marcus thought about Krindar, Whisper, Nyx, and even Zephyr, all of whom had embraced his unconventional tactics. Maybe there was more common ground between species than anyone had realized. I'd be willing to try, sir. Excellent. We will begin next week with a special seminar series. I believe we shall call it Alternative Combat Philosophy. You will have the opportunity to share your human perspectives on warfare with any students interested in attending. As Marcus left the instructor's office, he realized that his mission to the Academy had taken an unexpected turn. He had come here to learn about alien combat techniques, but instead, he might end up teaching them about human ones. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their adaptability. It was their ability to turn fighting into art. The Academy's largest training hall had been reconfigured for Marcus's first Alternative Combat Philosophy seminar. What had started as a simple class offering had somehow grown into the most anticipated event in recent Academy history. Over 200 students from 47 different species had signed up, forcing the instructors to move the session to a space normally reserved for graduation ceremonies. Marcus stood at the center of the circular hall, looking up at the tiered seating that surrounded him like an amphitheater. Every seat was filled and more students floated, perched, or hovered in spaces designed for their particular anatomies. The diversity was overwhelming, from the crystalline resonance whose bodies chimed softly when they moved, to the plasma-based ethereals contained in magnetic field generators, to species so alien that Marcus wasn't even sure how they perceived the world around them. Nervous? Krindar asked, his mandibles clicking in what Marcus had learned was affectionate amusement. The insectoid had positioned himself near the demonstration area, along with the other members of Marcus's former team. Terrified, Marcus admitted. Fighting one opponent is simple. Trying to explain complex philosophical concepts to dozens of species with completely different ways of thinking? That's much harder. Whisper's gaseous form swirled in his containment suit. Perhaps you should approach this like combat. Adapt your strategy based on your audience's responses. Before Marcus could reply, Instructor Veltar entered the hall, his massive centauroid form drawing immediate attention from every student present. The conversations died away as he approached the center of the demonstration area. Students of the Academy, his voice boomed through the translation systems. Today we explore new perspectives on the art of combat. Cadet Chen will demonstrate techniques and concepts that may challenge your preconceptions about warfare. I expect all of you to approach this with open minds and respectful attention. The instructor's 6 eyes swept across the assembled students, lingering on a few who had been vocal critics of human capabilities. Remember that the Academy's mission is to expand your understanding of combat in all its forms. Dismissing new concepts without consideration is the mark of a weak mind, not a strong warrior. With that warning delivered, Veltar moved to an observation platform and gestured for Marcus to begin. Marcus took a deep breath and looked up at the sea of alien faces. Compound eyes, optical sensors, and other sensory organs all focused on him. He had prepared extensively for this moment, but now that it was here, all his planned speeches seemed inadequate. Instead, he decided to start with action. Who among you considers themselves a skilled fighter? He asked. Dozens of appendages, tentacles, and manipulator arms shot up around the amphitheater. Marcus smiled and pointed to Zarathek, whose reptilian features had shifted to a pattern that indicated confidence. Cadet Zarathek, would you join me in the demonstration area? The large reptilian rose from her seat with fluid grace, her forearms flexing as she moved down to the center of the hall. Several students leaned forward, expecting another quick combat demonstration like the one that had started Marcus's reputation. Now, Marcus said, addressing the crowd while Zarathek took a combat stance beside him. I want everyone to observe carefully. Zarathek, please attack me with full force. The reptilian's eyes widened. Full force? That could seriously injure you. Trust me, Marcus said calmly. But first, let me ask the audience a question. How many of you believe that Zarathek will defeat me easily? Nearly half the students indicated agreement. Zarathek was larger, stronger, faster, and came from a species bred for warfare. Basic logic suggested that in a direct confrontation, the human wouldn't stand a chance. How many believe I will win quickly? Like in my previous demonstrations, another significant portion of the audience indicated this expectation. Marcus's reputation had grown considerably since his arrival at the Academy. And how many aren't sure what will happen? The remaining students showed uncertainty, which was exactly what Marcus had been hoping for. Excellent. Now Zarathek, attack with full power, but stop your strike just before contact. Don't hold back on speed or force, just control the final impact. The reptilian nodded and launched herself forward, her forearms coordinating in a devastating pattern that would have overwhelmed most opponents. Her claws sliced through the air with lethal precision, her powerful legs driving her forward with incredible momentum. Marcus didn't try to block, dodge, or counterattack. Instead, he stepped aside and gently redirected Zarathek's momentum, causing her to stumble past him and struggle to regain her balance. The movement was so subtle that many students missed it entirely. Again, Marcus said calmly. Zarathek reset and attacked from a different angle, this time with even more speed and power. Once again, Marcus simply wasn't there when her strikes arrived, though he barely seemed to move at all. Again. The third attack came with desperate fury, Zarathek throwing everything she had into a combination that should have been impossible to avoid. Marcus flowed around it like smoke, his movement so economical that he appeared to be standing still while the reptilian exhausted herself attacking empty air. When Zarathek finally stopped, breathing heavily and clearly frustrated, Marcus turned to address the audience. What did you observe? A crystalline student's body chimed as he spoke. You avoided her attacks, but your movement was minimal. How is this possible? Because I wasn't fighting Zarathek, Marcus explained. I was fighting her attacks. There's a crucial difference. He gestured for Zarathek to remain in the demonstration area. Most combat training focuses on defeating opponents through superior force, speed, or technique. But what if the goal isn't to defeat your opponent, but to defeat their attacks? What if you could neutralize threats without harming the being who presents them? A tentacled creature from the aquatic sectors of the galaxy raised several appendages, This seems like philosophical wordplay. Combat is combat, Marcus nodded respectfully. Let me show you what I mean. Zarathek, this time I want you to attack me, but think about our previous encounters. Try to anticipate my responses. The reptilian's scales shifted to a more thoughtful pattern as she considered the challenge. When she attacked this time, her movements were more controlled, her strikes designed to counter the evasions she expected Marcus to use. But Marcus had changed his approach as well. Instead of avoiding her attacks entirely, he intercepted them at the moment of maximum extension, when Zarathek was committed to her movements and couldn't easily adapt. His counters were precise and controlled, demonstrating how he could have incapacitated her at any point while choosing not to do so. This is what human martial arts call adaptive flow, Marcus explained as Zarathek stepped back, her expression showing new understanding. Every exchange teaches you something about your opponent's patterns, preferences, and capabilities. Every response you make should be designed not just to address the current attack, but to influence future exchanges. An insectoid student similar to Krindar clicked his mandibles. You are fighting multiple battles simultaneously: the physical confrontation, the psychological manipulation, and the strategic positioning for subsequent encounters. Exactly. Marcus felt a surge of excitement as the concepts began to resonate with his audience. Now let's explore this further. Who here has studied predator-prey relationships on their homeworld? Most of the students indicated familiarity with the concept. In nature, predators don't usually fight their prey to the death. They use the minimum energy required to make the kill, conserving strength for future hunts. Prey animals don't try to defeat predators. They try to escape or make themselves too costly to pursue. Both sides are optimizing for survival, not victory. Marcus began moving through a series of demonstration techniques, each one flowing into the next like a dance. Human martial arts apply this same principle to conflicts between intelligent beings. The goal isn't to prove superiority, it's to resolve the situation with minimum cost to all parties involved. An avian student whose species Marcus didn't recognize called out from the upper tiers. But what about honor? What about demonstrating courage and strength? Those are valid values, Marcus replied. But consider this: which requires more courage? Charging into battle with overwhelming force, or entering combat, knowing that you will use only the minimum force necessary? Which demonstrates more strength? Crushing an opponent completely or controlling yourself so precisely that you can choose exactly how much damage to inflict? Zephyr, who had remained silent through most of the demonstration, finally spoke up. On my world we have a saying: the greatest warrior is one who wins without fighting, but the wise warrior is one who can fight without winning. Marcus smiled at the avian warrior. Your people understand the principle. Combat skills should serve wisdom, not replace it. For the next 2 hours, Marcus guided the students through exercises that challenged their fundamental assumptions about conflict. He demonstrated how timing could defeat strength, how positioning could overcome speed, how psychology could neutralize superior weapons. More importantly, he showed them how these same principles could be applied to prevent conflicts from becoming violent in the first place. As the seminar concluded, the audience was noticeably quieter than when it had begun. Students who had arrived expecting entertainment had instead received education that challenged their deepest beliefs about warfare and violence. Instructor Veltar approached the demonstration area as students began filing out of the hall. His 6 eyes studied Marcus with an expression that might have been pride. Cadet Chen, he said formally, the Academy Council has reviewed your performance and proposals. We would like to offer you a position as Assistant Instructor of Alternative Combat Philosophy, effective immediately. The hall fell silent as students stopped their exodus to hear Marcus's response. Becoming an instructor at the Galactic Combat Academy was an honor that most beings trained decades to achieve. Marcus looked around at the faces, compound eyes, and sensory organs focused on him, representing dozens of species and hundreds of different perspectives on warfare and violence. He thought about the conversations he'd had with Krindar, Whisper, Nyx, and even Zarathek over the past weeks, and how those exchanges had changed not just their understanding of combat, but his own understanding of teaching. I accept, he said finally, on one condition. Veltar's tail lashed with surprise. Condition? Marcus gestured toward his former teammates and the other students who had embraced his unconventional approaches. I want to co-teach with representatives from other species. Human martial arts are valuable, But they're not the only path to understanding combat. Every species here has evolved unique approaches to conflict resolution. True mastery comes from synthesizing all these perspectives into something greater than any single tradition could achieve alone. The instructor's expression shifted to what Marcus was beginning to recognize as the alien equivalent of a grin. Agreed, Assistant Instructor Chen. Class schedules will be distributed tomorrow. As Marcus watched the last students leave the hall, he realized that his mission to the academy had evolved far beyond anything Earth's government had envisioned. He wasn't just learning about alien combat techniques anymore. He was helping to create an entirely new understanding of what it meant to be a warrior in a galaxy full of different species, different values, and different ways of resolving conflicts. And somehow, that felt more important than any individual victory he could have achieved. 6 months had passed since Marcus first stepped into the Academy's combat hall as a mocked human cadet. Now, as Assistant Instructor Chen, he stood before the Galactic Council's Military Affairs Committee in the Academy's most prestigious conference chamber. Representatives from the major spacefaring civilizations sat around a circular table that accommodated dozens of different anatomies, all of them focused on the presentation he was about to deliver. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had come to the Academy to learn about alien warfare and bring that knowledge back to Earth. Instead, the galaxy was asking him to explain how human approaches to combat could revolutionize interspecies conflict resolution. Honored representatives, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. 6 months ago, the Academy accepted its first human combat student as part of our species' integration into galactic civilization. Today I'm here to present data on what we've learned from that experiment. Admiral Thexrel, a massive cephalopod whose species commanded the galaxy's most powerful naval forces, gestured with one tentacle. Assistant Instructor Chen, our preliminary reports suggest that human combat techniques are unorthodox. Please explain why the Council should, consider implementing these methods in our military academies. Marcus activated the holographic display at the center of the table, showing statistics that had been compiled over the past months. The results speak for themselves. Combat injury rates in training exercises have decreased by 67% since we introduced human martial arts principles. Mission success rates in complex scenarios have increased by 43%. Most significantly, diplomatic resolution of simulated conflicts has increased by over 200%. Counselor Vexmari, a crystalline being whose species specialized in strategic analysis, chimed with interest. Explain this last statistic. How do combat techniques improve diplomatic outcomes? Because human martial arts teach students to think beyond simple victory or defeat, Marcus replied. When you understand how to control conflict precisely, you gain options that don't exist if you can only choose between surrender and total warfare. He manipulated the display to show footage from recent Academy exercises. Watch this scenario. 2 teams are competing for control of a resource depot. Under traditional training protocols, this would result in a direct confrontation with significant casualties on both sides. The hologram showed alien cadets deploying in standard military formations, preparing for a conventional assault. The tactics were sound, the execution professional, but the outcome predictable. Whoever had superior firepower would win at considerable cost. Now, observe the same scenario with students trained in alternative combat philosophy. The second recording showed a completely different approach. Instead of massing for direct assault, the teams engaged in complex maneuvering that looked more like a dance than a battle. Feints, withdrawals, and repositioning created opportunities for negotiation even as combat continued. The eventual resolution involved one team withdrawing in exchange for guaranteed access to the depot during specific time periods. Both sides achieved their primary objectives, Marcus explained. The winning team gained control of the depot, but the losing team secured predictable access to resources. No casualties, minimal resource expenditure, and a solution that could be sustained long-term. General Krax, an armored reptilian whose species had built their empire through conquest, hissed skeptically. This assumes that all conflicts can be resolved through negotiation. Some enemies will not accept anything less than total victory. Marcus nodded respectfully. You're absolutely correct, General. That's why human martial arts also teach us to recognize when violence is unavoidable and how to apply it with maximum efficiency. But the key insight is this: the choice between negotiation and violence should be made strategically, not automatically. He changed the display to show combat statistics from real military engagements throughout galactic history. Analysis of major conflicts over the past 1,000 years reveals that approximately 70% involved resources or territories that could have been shared or traded rather than fought over. The economic cost of those wars exceeded the value of what was being contested by factors of hundreds or thousands. Counselor Wisith, whose aquatic species served as the galaxy's primary mediators, created harmonics that the translator rendered as thoughtful humming. You suggest that combat training should include economic and diplomatic analysis? I suggest that warriors should understand the full context of any conflict they're asked to participate in, Marcus replied. A soldier who can evaluate whether a military objective is worth its cost is more valuable than one who simply follows orders without question. The discussion continued for several hours, with representatives questioning every aspect of the alternative combat philosophy program. Marcus found himself explaining concepts that had become second nature to him. The difference between tactical victory and strategic success. The importance of maintaining opponent dignity even in defeat. The way that controlled demonstration of capability could be more effective than unlimited application of force. Finally, Admiral Thexeral raised a tentacle for silence. Assistant Instructor Chen, your proposals are intriguing, but they represent a fundamental shift in how the galaxy approaches military training. What evidence do you have that these concepts would scale beyond an academic environment? Marcus had been expecting this question. With your permission, I'd like to call in some witnesses. The conference chamber doors opened to admit a group that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. Zarthik entered first, her reptilian form moving with a new kind of controlled grace that integrated her natural power with human martial arts principles. Behind her came Krindar, Whisper, Nyx, Zephyr, and a dozen other former students who had become co-instructors in the program. These individuals represent 12 different species, Marcus said, as they arranged themselves around the conference table. Each has integrated human martial arts concepts with their own cultural and biological approaches to combat. Together, they've developed training methods that work for beings regardless of their evolutionary background. Zarathek stepped forward, her scales displaying the formal patterns her species used for addressing superiors. Honored counsel, before studying with Instructor Chen, I believe that strength and aggression were the only tools a warrior needed. I have learned that true strength includes knowing when not to use force. Krindar's mandibles clicked as he accessed his memory files. Our species evolved as hunters. We learned to kill efficiently and quickly. Human martial arts taught us that the same skills used for hunting could be applied to protection, preservation, and even healing. One by one, each of the former students spoke about how the alternative combat philosophy had changed not just their fighting techniques, but their understanding of what it meant to be a warrior in a complex, interconnected galaxy. General Krax listened with growing attention as Zephyr described how the integration of human and avian combat principles had improved his species' peacekeeping effectiveness by over 300%. The avian warrior's testimony was particularly compelling, because his people were known for their rigid adherence to honor codes that had previously made them inflexible in diplomatic situations. When the testimonials concluded, the council members retreated to a private discussion that lasted nearly an hour. Marcus waited with his former students, all of them understanding that this decision would affect not just their own futures, but the direction of military training throughout galactic civilization. Admiral Thexeral finally returned with the other representatives, his cephalopod features unreadable. Assistant Instructor Chen, the council has reached a decision. We are authorizing the implementation of alternative combat philosophy training at all major military academies throughout council space. Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief, but the Admiral wasn't finished. Furthermore, we are establishing a new position, Director of Integrated Combat Studies. This individual will be responsible for developing curriculum that incorporates the best practices from all member species into a unified training program. The Admiral's tentacles shifted in what Marcus had learned was the cephalopod equivalent of a smile. We are offering this position to you. The silence that followed was complete. Marcus looked around at his former students, all of whom were displaying various species-specific expressions of excitement and pride. The magnitude of what was being offered gradually sank in. "Honored Council," he said finally, "I'm deeply grateful for this opportunity, but I have to ask, are you certain you want a human in such a position? 6 months ago, my species was considered militarily insignificant." Counselor Vexmari's crystalline form chimed with harmonics that sounded like laughter. "Director Chen, 6 months ago, we measured military significance purely in terms of destructive capacity. You have taught us that true military strength lies in the wisdom to choose the right tool for each situation." Marcus thought about the message he would need to send to Earth, explaining how his mission had evolved from learning about alien warfare to teaching the galaxy about human approaches to conflict. He thought about the students who would benefit from training that emphasized precision over power, strategy over strength, wisdom over aggression. Most of all, he thought about the possibility of a galaxy where conflicts could be resolved through understanding rather than annihilation, where different species could learn from each other instead of simply trying to dominate each other. "I accept," he said, and felt the weight of the future settling on his shoulders. As the council meeting concluded and congratulations were offered by representatives from across the galaxy, Marcus realized that his 13-second victory over Krindar had been just the beginning. The real victory wasn't in proving that humans could fight, but in demonstrating that fighting itself could be transformed from an act of destruction into an art of preservation. In the months that followed, as the alternative combat philosophy spread throughout galactic civilization, military historians would mark this moment as the beginning of a new era. Not because human techniques were superior to those of other species, but because the integration of different approaches created something greater than any single tradition could achieve alone. And at the center of it all was a young human who had come to the academy, expecting to be its weakest student, only to discover that sometimes the greatest strength comes from knowing when not to use force at all. The galaxy was learning to fight like humans, but more importantly, they were learning to think like humans, that every conflict was a problem to be solved. Every opponent was a potential teacher, and every victory was meaningless unless it made the universe a better place for everyone involved. Marcus Chen had earned his black belt in 13 seconds, but building a better galaxy would take a lifetime, and he was just getting started.